AI lies. AI is not factual all the time. Sometimes it's right. Sometimes it gets things wrong. Sometimes it makes things up.
What exactly is it adding? Is it accurate? Is like one of the biggest challenges.
I hope these new AI capabilities will open up audio for more advertisers, particularly smaller businesses.
Well, it's critical, I think, for the people who are behind that tech to be working with creative agencies completely hand in hand.
I think anything that makes advertising, in particular audio advertising, easier and faster as well, I think is to be welcomed.
Hello and welcome to Advertising Amplified, the Radiocentre podcast that helps you harness the power of radio and audio advertising to boost the impact of your marketing campaigns. I'm Omar Oakes. In this series, we're looking at things like how audio acts as a performance multiplier and audio's role in demand generation and conversion. With the help of some industry experts, we'll tell you how radio and digital audio can help you connect directly with your audience and amplify your campaign's impact. So today, we're talking about the hot potato, AI. From voice cloning to predictive targeting, AI is rapidly transforming the world of audio advertising. But what does this actually mean for advertisers? And how do you make the most of this technology without losing the human touch? Joining me are three humans, I'm assured, and very well they seem to. Joining me are George Butler from Bauer, Flora Williams from MGOMD, and Steve McGoldrick from Radiocentre. Welcome to you all today. So today I want to get into how much AI is transforming audio advertising. We're talking about personalisation, techniques like voice cloning. I'm sure no one's cloning my voice to my knowledge right now. I want to talk about voice cloning, synthetic voices, AI in media planning and buying, and of course the future. So much has changed already, but they're set to change even more. Where is this all heading? George, you work in broadcasting, but Bauer, you're also the co-host of a podcast, AI Haven't a Clue. I see what you did there.
Thank you.
It's excellent. Everyone says so. So tell us, you've been researching every week for this podcast, the latest in AI. You probably have more of a clue than you did before. How have you seen AI-powered tools influence creativity in audio ads?
You know what? I think the tools have been incremental changes to kind of make the way that we do our jobs in media and advertising a bit more effective, or perhaps improve performance a little bit. I think what's interesting is some businesses are jumping right in, including in the media and advertising world, jumping right in and making quite big changes based on what they think is going to come with AI. Others are being a little bit more cautious. And there's a real mix of examples where businesses have gone in, got rid of a whole layer of jobs, and then 6 months later had to rehire the whole layer of jobs because they realized they can't function without it. But then on the flip side, a business like Salesforce recently made hundreds of jobs redundant because of AI, but moved all of those people into different roles to unlock more creativity or strategic potential. So I think we are seeing AI being implemented across what we do, but to different degrees of success.
Okay. Flora Williams from the Omnicom media agency, MGOMD. We'll get into specifics over the course of this conversation, but just let's take a broad view. How do you see the landscape in terms of responding to what George just said? Do you see the AI changes that you're seeing come on stream? Do they seem incremental? Do they seem transformative? I mean, if you could give it a score out of 10, what would you say?
So I do agree on the most part that they tend to be incremental, but we are at MGOMD, we're really, I would say we're leaning in, but with caution. So we're curious, but we're cautious kind of thing. So we are fully embracing as much as we can in order to experiment and understand, but also always having that human touch to understand, like, what exactly is it adding? Is it accurate? Is like one of the biggest challenges really for us, especially in the planning space. But we are experimenting a lot and it does feel really exciting. I personally feel like if I think about how I did my role a year ago versus now, it feels quite different.
Really?
So say, for example, with different clients, we've been focusing on how to understand audiences better. And we've created, for example, for John Lewis, this audience AI tool which takes our audience segmentation and just deep dives into everything. And you can ask it questions, you just get to quicker answers, which means that you can dive more into the audience. So, so it's not like we're saving time, we're just doing better work ultimately. So it feels like a big enabler for us, which I think is really exciting.
So Steve McGoldrick, head of marketing at Radiocentre. So you've heard from media owner, media agency. What about the wider commercial radio industry? Perhaps conversations that you have with members over the last couple of years. I mean, how do you see AI's role developing now in 2025 and next year?
Well, I think everyone is moving at different speeds. I think the majority of organizations, including in our sector, are still very much in the test and learn phase. But I mean, just in terms of audio advertising, we at Radiocentre, we have a campaign which is live at the moment. It's voiced by Diane Morgan. And so obviously at the beginning of the campaign process, I put in our brief into ChatGPT to see what sort of taglines and scripts would it come up with. And in the process of making our campaign, sitting there in the studio with Diane, it kind of came to me that actually we're so far away from replacing humans in terms of content, in terms of advertising, because there's so much that goes into script writing and advertising and, content on air as well. It's exciting to see where things go, but I think we're quite a long way off from all of us sort of being replaced by robots anytime soon.
I thought you were about to tell us that it was AI Diane Morgan.
No.
Yeah, that's good to know. I was about to say
AI was not used as far as I know in the campaign at all.
I like the idea also of kind of using ChatGPT to test it out and then almost having to beat that. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the baseline now.
Yeah.
And everything should be above that. It's quite a fun kind of challenge.
It's good to test out your ideas, right? And to have some sort of benchmark of what could we do based on what is already out there in the market.
We spoke to a comedian on the podcast who uses ChatGPT to road test their material. So they don't turn to ChatGPT and write me jokes, but they're like, here is the set, here is a pitch I've got for a TV producer. What do you think? And it's really critical. So it's fun to experiment it with that in that way. But obviously, it's not pumping out creativity for you.
Well, I sort of find that at the moment, in my personal use of AI, I'm leaning into what I know I'm not quite as good at, and using AI for that. So, for example, I'm not particularly great at, maybe I shouldn't say this on a podcast, but I don't feel like I'm particularly great at creating really snazzy marketing tool names, for example, or a catchphrase, or making something sound super exciting. So I might go into ChatGPT and be like, the audience tool is this, but make it sound more exciting, or add alliteration in, or give me loads of different ideas. And it will give me 50, for example, and I might take inspiration from that, or I might create that. So I think it's a really interesting equalizer for the industry.
Interesting. All right. Well, so you talked about what you're not so hot at, Flora.
Yeah, we shouldn't have said that.
Something that's definitely in your wheelhouse. Let's talk about media planning. So media planners such as yourself, I suppose you've always wanted ideally to get the right message to the right person. Tell us, is AI making that more achievable in audio now? And if so, how?
I think it's helping, but it does kind of bring me back to, I think it's 2015 when A Million Ads was launched, which I remember. I think I can claim that I did the first ad with them, which was Deliveroo. And that to me still feels like the same kind of concept. It was super exciting, dynamic audio, basically custom created with loads of different signals. That was cutting edge. And I still kind of feel like that approach is cutting edge, right? That's what they deliver is still something that we can deliver now. It's just slightly different tech that can deliver it. I do think that there's loads of new opportunities which have emerged. I love the contextual buys. I think that's super interesting. So AI contextual buys where you could buy into different genres or topics. I think that's just brilliant because from a planning perspective, context is absolutely key. And if you've got a creative message that does have a really clear creative contextual area, aligning it can just be so powerful. And we can see that in the results. It delivers in terms of recall, in terms of so many different metrics.
I mean, even before we started talking about artificial intelligence as an industry, we've had the ability to do dynamic creative optimization, lots of hyper-targeting. But we've always had this issue, particularly with audio, in terms of, well, we've gone from decades of radio being this cost-effective, broad-reach medium to suddenly being able to target everything. Can get quite expensive, can't it? So where are we at now in terms of planning? Is it worth it for an advertiser to go down the road of hyper-targeting DCO?
I still think it is, but I think it's a combination. You need to combine with the broadcast channels generally in order to gain the reach that you probably need to deliver. But it does depend on the KPI. It depends on the message. I'll always look at the options side by side from a planning perspective and do all the numbers and be like, oh, actually, sometimes it is more cost effective to actually reach the broader audience and have also the positive wastage, which shouldn't be forgotten, right? Because that has value to it as well. There is definitely a balancing act.
Obviously, the likes of Bauer and Global doing really interesting things in addressable audio for a number of years now. What do you see kind of changing in terms of the way that you offer things? Without naming names of particular advertisers or groups of advertisers, where do you see the trends going, George, in terms of addressability and how AI will influence that?
I think there's a few potential key things that AI might do for the audio, for audio advertising. And I think Flora is exactly right. That blended approach is often the sweet spot where you can reach the nation. Radio still does reach 90% of pretty much of the UK every week, and you've now got about a third of that audience, commercially speaking, where you can target them in a different way across connected devices, whether that's in the Rayo app or via your smart speaker. So it's that's growing as well. So I think that space, firstly, is a really interesting space because you can connect in a deeper level. And I'm not just talking about the fact that you can target somebody. It's not just about where you know how old they are and what they're into and where they live. It's about the creative being able to connect in a deeper level. And I think that's where over the next few years we're going to see big improvements. I also think that a completely different audience will be opened up, which is small businesses. Right now, a small business might be spending a few hundred quid, £1,000 a month, and they turn to Facebook and they turn to Alpha and Google because that's where they can get a bit of bang for their buck at a low level. And actually, it's quite daunting, the thought of doing a radio campaign. Oh, that must be really expensive. Well, I think that's going to change. I think where we're going to get to with AI creativity, the ability to use AI in planning, I think that's going to open up a completely new sector to audio advertising. And that's really exciting. So I'm looking forward to where we go with that over the next few years.
Yeah, I think this is, Flora, you mentioned at the top 2015 when the first million ads ad was launched. I think about in the last 10 years, to your point, George, all the growth in this industry has pretty much gone into the pockets of Facebook, Google, Amazon. And a lot of it has come from those small businesses. And we talk a lot about the long tail. The long tail kind of is the tail in this industry, increasingly so. Given that, do you see a future in which Bauer might do what, for example, an ITV is doing in TV, where they can offer a cheap generative AI creative ad? Do you see a future in which a Bauer might do that?
Potentially. I think, as you say, you can go into Meta's advertising solutions and you can use their AI to create an ad, and you're up and running for the lowest amount that you want to spend. And the ad industry has to do something to compete with these tech giants. And I think also it's really important that trusted platforms, whether it is ITV or Bauer or whoever it may be, trusted platforms are competing. Because when we talk about AI, I think the one thing that is always at risk is trust, whether that is, it's a deep fake. We don't know if it's real or not, or whether actually we're seeing horrible things happening with scammers using AI. Trust is the big thing that is going to come into question over the next few years. It already has. Mm. And I think the one thing that platforms like audio have, especially audio, is trust. It's Europe's most trusted medium. And I think it's a good thing if we can offer something which means small businesses can have a trusted advertising outlet, that's a good thing. And it's something that is only going to benefit the wider advertising industry, I think.
It's absolutely critical. Like, we need to retain that trust for radio, for audio in general, in order, and this is, by the way, across all media, trust is obviously eroding. There's huge challenges within the fact that content is being created for the 24-second newsfeed rather than the 24-hour newsfeed, right? So there's just constant content generation, which is super challenging. And I came across this radio station called Prisa Radio, which I hadn't heard of, which is a Spanish-owned radio station, from what I understand. And they created this audio deepfake AI detector. I just thought that was such a fascinating creation. They won loads of awards for it. And it gave a kind of probability score when you uploaded an audio file to see whether it was likely to be fake or not. That's a super interesting space. I'd love to see that created for the UK.
I think Flora's got such a point there in that trust is the most valuable commodity right now in everything, especially in advertising. And it is audio's USP. Yeah. So I think wherever we go with artificial intelligence, whether, we touch upon creative tools, whatever it might be, the number one thing I think is that we retain trust above everything else. And we cannot do anything that would risk being this trusted medium, both for advertisers, but also for listeners.
And we have to remember why people are listening to radio and their favourite podcast. It's because of the personalities, right? It's because of the people behind the mic.
Totally.
And so those relationships with listeners, I think people want to hear real voices. They want to hear people. And that also adds a great amount of value to radio stations and different audio brands in terms of being able to use those assets, which are the people behind the mic, to extend campaigns across different channels, so that it's more than just, radio that, of yesteryear, where it was just sort of broadcast radio, but actually there's so much more that could be done with brands in the space of advertising in audio.
And I'm biased on this, but I do genuinely think that as we become, as everything around us becomes more synthetic and artificial, like the yearning to hear a real voice play real music and connect with me in a real way, like I think that's going to become increasingly valuable.
Yeah,
well,
it's a sense of
I agree.
Community and connection. A lot of people, they really value that. I think increasingly with more time spent online and with a lot of the kind of more toxic content that we're seeing on social media, I think the presence of these people, speaking to large groups of people at any one time, and the call-ins and competitions and everything like that, it really does enrich communities' lives, and we need to remember that.
We've actually seen, there's a piece of research from Mail Metro who've deep dived into different patterns of behaviours over time, and they've basically found that people are returning to in-person way more than ever before. So you can actually see that in people's behaviours now. They're yearning for experience. You can see that in the retail space as well. People are going back into retail spaces and wanting to experience and touch products. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity for audio as well. It's like the connection that you gain from listening to people. And also, let's not forget that audio is screenless, generally speaking, which is also a breath of fresh air. I think that's a good thing for audio. People are spending too much time in front of screens. If you look at the time spent on laptops, TVs, etc., or on their phone throughout a day, it's mind-boggling how much time we spend. So I think there is also a trend of people being very conscious of spending less screen time, and therefore the return to audio is also an opportunity.
Ears are great, aren't they? One on each side of your head for stereo. It's because of ears that radio ads can amplify your advertising. 40 million adults listen to commercial radio every week. That's 80 million ears, give or take. See radio differently at radiocentre.org.
Yeah. And also, George, you mentioned before about this yearning for authenticity. And we talked a lot about, check out the previous episodes, but we talked a lot about YouTube actually as an audio platform. Lots of podcasts are published on YouTube. And if you only need to go onto YouTube and see the ads that are clearly created by AI, a lot of them, and the quality that's coming out there. And it definitely does not smack of authenticity or even high class creativity, I would say. What about in terms of techniques we mentioned before, like voice cloning. George, I mean, don't get too sensitive because you're a presenter, obviously. What's your take on it? I mean, could it be an opportunity? Do you see it as an obvious threat? Could it be something where you could augment what you're doing?
Synthetic voice now it's all right. Sometimes it sounds kind of decent. Sometimes it sounds rubbish. I don't think I've ever heard it and thought that sounds exactly like a human, or you've replicated that voice really well. That's not to say that won't happen in a few years' time. But I do think there is potentially a place for synthetic voices in terms of experimenting with what we can do creatively. So we talked about a creative approach where you can deliver many, many different executions, and the cost of that could come right down, but also the creative possibilities there could become infinite.
Yeah, I think be cautious is quite an overview.
It really depends on the campaign, doesn't it? I mean, being able to create lots of versions depending on, the person that you're targeting and what they're doing, it's brilliant. It's such a good opportunity, but it's just making sure that you've got that trust and also the quality of output, because it is really hard to write a good script, and if you're creating sort of millions of versions of a script, you're going to have to hope that at least some of it is really well crafted, and we've got to remember the craft behind it, and make sure that the creative is right as well.
Well, it's critical, I think, for people who are behind that tech to be working with creative agencies completely hand in hand. In my opinion, it cannot replace that. You have to have the creatives there directing it, understanding it, producing it, writing it. I think that is at the moment absolutely critical. At OMG, we have this product called ArtBot, which is a dynamic AI generated solution, which it is predominantly used for display and video, but it also is usable in audio and is being tested. So I think there's a really interesting space because that's all through the same tech. So suddenly you're creative across display, video and audio, and digital out of home, for example, could all be synced together. And the fact that that's consistent is also really impactful and important for us. So there's big strides happening in this space, which I think is really exciting. As a planner, I'm really excited.
Well, what about, so on the planning side, so you mentioned at the top of the conversation that in some ways compared to a year ago, your job has really changed thanks to AI. So it seems like AI is now fundamental. It's not a nice to have anymore. So on a day-to-day front, walk us through how you can see AI has changed what you do.
I mean, if I took, for example, the beginning of a campaign, like a brief from a campaign, we have access to some tools which you can rewrite a brief and it can generate sparks of ideas for you. That's cool. We've got an AI tool which in a similar vein will look at like industry trends and different things going on in the spaces, but it's all a protected tool. So it's from publications and from like academic reports and publishers in general. So I do think that that's a really trusted, useful thing to resource to break down a brief and just gain a little bit more understanding. We'd also use AI to understand what competitors are doing in the marketplace outside of just what we know and the tools that we have. So I would always treat it with curiosity to just understand as much as possible when we're kind of just understanding a brief. We're starting to experiment in building synthetic data audience panels, which is a real challenge legally and ethically, which we need to be considered of and ensure that we're doing it the right way. So ultimately, when creating synthetic audience panels or synthetic audience approaches, we need to make sure that the data is the best possible data, because that's what everything's going to be built on. And then we're also then getting into the craft of actually building a plan. Our Omni tool suite already has AI built into it, and everything we do is human touch. So we would take all the budget splits that it might spit out, but we would always adjust it based on what we know about the creative or the role of channel or the KPIs, etc. So there's a lot more that we would enrich to deliver against it. In terms of actual activation, there's extra tech and MarTech involvement than ever before. So of course, programmatic is AI, but there's loads more in that space, which is really interesting. So say, for example, for Specsavers, we created a live appointment feed, which then showed up on the out of home. So it would say in digital out of home, there's an appointment at this time in your local store. and that's all through a data feed. So that's just optimizing the user experience. And then in terms of effectiveness and reporting, I mean, there's so much that we're doing in the space of AI, and I think that there is a lot more to do. I was speaking to Rob Beavers, who's our Chief Effectiveness Officer, who is absolutely fantastic and visionary in this space. And he felt like we would be able to use AI in the future, not too distant future, to be able to kind of connect the lines of sight between our actual campaigns and the outcomes much easier than ever before. So it feels like for him, he was like, actually, this is a great opportunity for more traditional channels like audio.
Yeah. I mean, Steve, how does that chime with, I mean, we've just heard from, a big agency from the buy side. I mean, how that conversation has changed when it comes to AI and planning over the years. What have you observed?
I think anything that makes things easier for planners to understand audiences and plan more successfully is great. My one concern would probably just be, it really relies on the data that's going into the models. So totally. I think we have a role across the industry to make sure that we're as transparent as possible. I think certain media channels, they're sort of less transparent about their data, and some channels prefer to mark their own homework. So we have long been a fan of third-party organizations like the joint industry currencies, for example, like Radar and Barb, taking a look and kind of verifying the data in terms of reach. But I'm sure as these models get more and more sophisticated, we'll need to do more manual checking as well to make sure, what is the source of all of this data. But I think anything that makes advertising, in particular audio advertising, easier and faster as well, I think is to be welcomed.
The quality of the data that is being inputted is really important. And I think it kind of goes back to what we've been saying this whole podcast, is that embracing AI is essential for the future of our industry, but doing everything in a way that will not jeopardize the trust that audiences and advertisers have in our platform, in my view, is the number one thing. And I think if there is anything that does risk that, it's probably not worth doing.
Let's talk about the future. And I've resisted the urge to get into speculative territory, but I'm going to allow for this last section for you to unleash your kind of navel-gazing urges. Let's talk about the future. Okay, so George, you're the obvious person to talk about this first. You do this AI Haven't a Clue podcast.
Yeah, novice, just
remember. You're going to talk to us what you've learned and kind of sum up over the last 4 months that you've been doing this. Where do you think the future is going? How do you see, for example, AI-driven voice-activated ads? I don't know if you've experimented with that on your own podcast or you've heard what brands are doing on Bauer platforms. Where do you see this going? We've
experimented with voice-activated ads. They're good, they work, and I think it's now time with new technology to probably go that next level with the creativity on it. It's always been a case of, is it worth the extra investment? Is there the audience there to back that up? And now that we are seeing this increased audience in the smart speaker space, partnered with what we can do creatively with AI, I think you could see some really interesting things where you are engaging with a brand in a way in which you can't really do on many other platforms.
If you talk about different layers of the marketing funnel, you can actually, from a voice perspective, interact with a brand, and you could take them all the way from awareness to consideration through to experience and purchase in one conversation. So suddenly that takes you into a really exciting area where the brand experience, the brand has control again.
Yeah, the example that I really liked was the Say It Now Over Energy campaign. You could ask your smart speaker for updates when the grid was being used less, and therefore when it was a good time to use your appliances at home and save money and help save the environment. And I think when you have more complex AI in the background, the LLMs working out, I mean, imagine all these data inputs that you could get feeding into a campaign like that. And so, yeah, I just think it's the future looks bright for these sorts of campaigns and unleashing new creative ideas.
We have, through our culture, kind of got used to this idea of the futuristic voice, whether it's like Back to the Future 3 or whatever 2 or whatever it might be. Got my Back to the Futures modeled up. That's terrible. We've kind of, since the 60s, 70s, 80s, through film especially, been used to this idea of this futuristic voice speaking to us. So when the smart speaker appeared, like, it was a bit like, oh, I've seen this in the films. but we'd seen it. It's like been a part of our lives in a way in which we've never had access to it before, but we knew what it was. I think there was a familiarity to that consumers could very quickly get their head around, audiences could. Maybe it is that next step in which it's like brands are, and organizations are worried they don't want to creep people out. Maybe that could be a factor in it.
I think that when it's a voice assistant and it's a brand and you're speaking to them on the voice assistant device, whatever it might be, as a consumer or as a listener or as a chatter, you're quite aware that it's AI. And I think that that's actually a really good thing.
I think it's early days as well. I mean, a lot of the examples that I've heard and a lot of our experiences, and I'm hearing the same thing from a lot of other marketers, is, you know, they've been trying AI, trying to implement it here and there. Sometimes the output is just not very good and they kind of give up after a while. And so I think maybe it is also just a question of time as these things improve.
I mean, advertising does need to make sure we don't have a race to the bottom. You know, for example, the Guess ad, that would have saved hundreds of thousands of pounds on a big shoot on hiring a big model. Other brands might look at that and go, well, we could do the same. Now, look, that was an interesting bit of novelty. It was, it got a lot of PR because it was new. I don't feel particularly comfortable in advertising, embracing saving money in order to deliver an artificial product, which is, it's all right. It's not as good as the real thing, but we need to, I think, avoid that space across.
And brands that don't do that are going to stand out more.
You hope so, right? You'd have to hope so.
Brands need to invest in new talent. I mean, we're seeing it across everything, right? Movies, music, and there's much more consolidation into a certain number of sort of kind of superstars. And I think as an industry, we do need to make sure we're nurturing talent in the same way that the rest of the media industry does.
There's also, outside of talent, I think there's a really interesting area that we need to also be aware of, which is that, as we know, if you use AI to, I don't know, for example, script write or to plan, it goes to a law of averages, which is a law of good averages, but still a law of averages. And ultimately, we know that the UK has a plethora of different personalities and backgrounds, and that's what makes it actually so interesting. That's what makes, for me, planning and buying interesting and the industry exciting. And actually, if you're just looking at what creatively, for example, seems to be resonating well on average, what that might not be tailoring for diversity within the UK. It might not be considering that people from different backgrounds, or that they might be neurodiverse and therefore that type of script actually doesn't resonate with them. There's also a real inclusivity challenge we have within the AI space. You ask it something and it tells you the answer, and you won't necessarily see all of the workings behind it to know whether it's taken that into account or not. So it's up to us as well to consider that we're prompting it in the right way to be consciously inclusive. Especially
when it's built on our data. It's built on our history, and that's not always a good thing. Yeah. As you said, it's not always representative, and
there's biases in data.
There's massive biases. So that's another thing we have to always remember when using AI, that there are it's built on our data, and our data is not really right. And I should also add, AI lies. AI is not factual all the time. Sometimes it's right. Sometimes it gets things wrong. Sometimes it makes things up. I will give you an example. I turned a bit of audio into a news story. I asked ChatGPT, could you turn a bit of audio into a news story? It created a news story for me with made up quotes. You cannot blindly trust AI. That's something which we should always remember.
But I think it is up to us, right? The future with AI and the future of advertising and media is we can define, and I think there's an important role for obviously regulators, but also for the advertisers and the people behind the work, how we want to ensure that we do have things like diversity and transparency, and we maintain that trust and the quality of output. And I hope that these new AI capabilities will open up audio for more advertisers, particularly smaller businesses, as you were saying. And then once they see the benefits of audio and those returns, then maybe they will create a new campaign with new talent and, get humans into the studio. And so I think lowering the barriers of entry, I think, is a really important part. And hopefully that will lead to future kind of audio superfans.
We're at this point now, I feel, where creativity is at a turning point in which we're about to find out if audiences are really going to embrace AI or whether they're just not going to engage with it in the same way.
I think ultimately it comes down to we are all at risk of selling ourselves short by forgetting that we have the best computer ever invented between our ears. This amazing thing, we use 25% of our energy just on our brains. Evolution has created this amazing supercomputer that we constantly sell ourselves short by going onto ChatGPT. And you might have heard the term AI psychosis by now, where people are using ChatGPT for therapy sessions. And, a lot of business leaders, they're probably using it to make a lot of business decisions, and it's trained again. If you want to be average, I just think you open yourself up to a lot of risk. So I would always say try and be interesting, try and be different, but ultimately it needs to come down to your brand principles. And if you don't do that job first, then, we've talked a lot about execution. The execution is only as good as the planning, in my view.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not about what I think, it's about what you think. And on the basis of that, I don't think AI is going to be challenging you guys for insight anytime soon. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that conversation, George, Flora and Steve. In our next episode, we'll be talking about one of the most powerful tools in the audio arsenal, but one that's inexplicably neglected, and that's music. But listener, please don't forget to subscribe to Advertising Amplified for more insight and inspiration, and check us out at radiocentre.org. I'm Omar Oakes. See you next time.